Getting old and dying in prison. It's a tragedy, but a reality to many inside the Louisiana Department of Corrections and in corrections in general throughout the United States and the world. People go to prison with life sentences, and eventually those life sentences come to an end when they die. Sentence served. You no longer owe a debt to community. Your debt has been paid with your life. When you die, that's what a life sentence is. You're going to die, and then now your sentence is over. Now you have paid your debt to society. Now you're free and clear, but you're dead. And that's a reality. Or you might get 40 years and never make it out. You might get 5 years or less than that. You may have 1 day left and you can die in prison. We've seen it happen. Just recently, a young boy was killed, I believe in Alabama or one of these places, and he was a day from getting out. And they brutally assaulted him sexually and killed him. A day before he was going home. You're not promised to get out of jail, so don't go to jail. Jail is a brutal place. And the reality is that some people are going to die sooner than later in prison. For those who make it out, it is a blessing because you have another chance. The crazy part is those that get out and go right back in. Do you want to know what's crazy? I was one of those people. I went to prison for 2 years in a state prison and got out and went back in and had to do 6 more years before I finally figured out that this ain't for me. What a fool that I was. But not everybody gets 1 and 2 chances. Some go in once and that's it. They die. This is the story of JD, the old man who died in prison. He went to prison when he was in his teenage years. I was on a compound with him. I wasn't really friends with him. I didn't specifically know him. I had, a few words with him here and there. He worked in the library and I read a lot of books. So I would communicate with him off and on in the library. Never had deep conversations with this dude. Maybe some small conversation. Oh, you checking this book out? I like this book, something like that. But no deep conversations. But I did have friends in prison who actually had more of a relationship with JD than I did. And they spoke to him and they would tell me his story because I didn't know his story from word of mouth from him. I knew it through secondhand, opinion on what people said from talking to him. And my friends would tell me, look, JD is in here for, I don't remember what he was in there for. It was either murder or rape, but he had a life sentence. And I know what you're saying. If you do murder or rape, you deserve to die in jail. I'm not here to dispute that, argue that, or discredit that, because some people who murder and some people who rape should die in prison, no doubt about it. But each circumstance is different and the facts of each case are different. And I don't know the facts or circumstances to JD's case. I just know the fact that I seen this old man in prison and he was beginning to deteriorate. He was beginning to go through dementia. His mind was failing him. His body was giving out on him. And he thought he was going home. There was times when he thought he wasn't in prison. They'd be like, man, he'd be like, we in jail? And they'd be like, yeah, JD, we in jail. And he'd be like, oh, how we get to jail? Dementia. His mind did not remember that he had just spent 50 years in prison. He forgot. And he's like, I'm in jail? And they're like, yeah, you in jail. He's like, oh. And he would start crying. My mom and dad? Oh, yeah, they died. And you're looking at him like, man, he's like, I didn't get to go to their funeral. I didn't get to say goodbye to my mom. That's a sad thing. He watched his brothers and sisters marry, have children, have a life, have grandchildren, and they died. He was the only one left, preserved in prison. That's right. His body was preserved in prison while everything he'd known passed him by. He watched life pass him by while he was in prison. He couldn't remember at times that he was even in jail, like I said. So this is what he would do. This dude would every once in a while go on this thought where he was free. He thought he was free. He thought he can come and go as he pleased. And in jail, there's a lockdown time at a certain time, a count time at a certain time. Well, JD would go to his locker and take the little bit of belongings he had, put in a plastic bag, and begin to walk out to jail like it was just time to go. Like he didn't have to check with no guard. Like he didn't have to do it. Like he could just go, get in his car and leave. And he would get all the way as far as he can, sometime all the way to the administration desk toward the front of the prison, because he wasn't a violent threat. He was an elderly man. So they would let him get so far and they'd be like, JD, what you doing? Where you going? And he'd be like, I'm going home. And they're like, JD, you can't go home. And he'd be like, but I'm supposed to go home today. And they're like, no, you're not going home, JD. You're doing a life sentence in prison. You're just getting older. He's like, I'm getting older? And they'd be like, yeah, JD, you're getting older. And he's like, am I dying? And they'd be like, and it was sad. And they'd be like, yeah, you're dying, JD. And he'd be like, I'm going to die in jail? And they said, you're going to die in prison. And he would have to go see the psychiatrist. And he would cry. And he would go through the memories. And they would help bring up his memories. Yes, you had a mom. She died in the 80s. Your dad died in the 90s. And we're in the 2000s, JD. And you're dying. His dementia would come and go. And he would have good times. Like I said, the only time I spoke to him was in the library when I was checking out a book. And I might be checking out a book like, War of the Worlds. And I'd be like, man, I just got, finished reading this book, War of the Worlds. It was pretty good. And he'd be like, yeah, H.G. Wells does a lot of good stuff. And he was sharp and crisp, And then he would go from doing that to the next day. He would be wandering about the yard. And the guards would be like, hey, are you okay? And he'd be like, yeah, I think I'm going to the grocery store. He hadn't been to the grocery store since he was a teenager. He made Canteen. This is sad. This is the reality. And no matter what your thoughts are on elderly in prison, people eventually die in prison. People get old and die in prison. JD died in jail. He died after I left, but my friends told me he died. And they said, when JD died, everybody said, man, JD, you free, bro. Your sentence has been served. And even the warden acknowledged that his debt is paid. He's no longer, liable or accountable to the state. He's paid in full. He's good with the state. But is that any way for anybody to live and die? No. Prison has a harsh reality. And whenever you think about prison, think about the elderly and those who are going to die in prison and the realities of it. And if you actually enjoyed this video and are looking forward and maybe want to hear some more things to talk about in prison and things that happen in prison, crime related, current events in crime, then type in the comments and say, hey, look, can you cover this topic? Or ask questions. I'll be glad to answer them. But can you give me a like and, a thumbs up, one of these? And can you subscribe if you enjoy prison and prison related topics and crime related topics? And my opinion on it. I'm going to give you the real opinion. I'm not going to give you the popular opinion. I'm going to tell you what I feel and what is true and what isn't true. I like facts, and it's okay to talk about opinions, but there's a difference between facts and opinions. Prison is a brutal reality, and some people do deserve to be in there. We're not going to justify and make excuses for those who have committed crimes. People should pay for their crimes, but hopefully they learn from them. And they can become, because most people are getting out of prison. Not everybody's going to die in prison like JD. Only a small percentage, I don't know what it is, 15% maybe, die in prison. But most are eventually going to get out. And they're going to die free. So you want to see people change their minds and change their thoughts and become better people. And don't get back out here and keep harming and hurting innocent people. Like I said, like and subscribe. And check out my new channel, With or Without Parole. I'm trying to get this thing going, and I appreciate all your support. Thanks.